Good morning. Welcome to the 9th meeting of the committee in 2014. Can I ask everyone to ensure they've switched off all mobile phones and other electronic equipment, please? Our first item of business today is an oral evidence session on the Disabled Persons Parking Badges Scotland Bill. I'd like to welcome our first panel this morning, who are Simon Cameron, Diversity Advisor, South Lanarkshire Council; Gordon Catchlove, Parking Fraud Prevention Officer, City of Edinburgh Council; Colin McNicol, Roads Manager, Support and Public Transport, Stirling Council; and Michael Brady, Assistant Group Manager, Parking Projects and Events of Glasgow City Council. Welcome. Would you like to make any opening remarks at all, gentlemen? No? Grand. In which case we'll move on. Can I ask you, first of all, do you think the policy intention of the bill has been met? Mr Catchlove?
Yes, I do. The reason I say that, I've been in enforcement of the Blue Badge scheme since 2005, since joining Edinburgh Council. And over the time, I've become more and more frustrated with the limited powers that I have to do my job outside of what I call full investigations under the RIPSA Act. I believe that the work we've done as part of the Blue Badge Working Group helps fill the void that is currently there.
Mr Brady?
Yes, I'd just like to an opening remark. My name is Michael Brady. I'm also a director of the British Parking Association and a council and board member. I'm a member of the representatives. I thought I should just let you know that. However, today I'm talking on behalf of Glasgow City Council. Yes, we have similar issues in terms of the misuse of blue badges. Being an urban authority, it's a different context from a rural authority. We have people who are misusing badges for financial gain. One of the benefits of the bill would allow us, obviously, to confiscate that badge and pass it to the actual lawful keeper and be able to notify them of that misuse. So I think the confiscation powers are an important part of this bill.
Mr McNicol?
Yeah, I agree as well. The bill's primary purpose is to improve enforcement of the scheme, principally by extending powers to local authorities. The general principle is sound, but will only be effective if local authorities assign the necessary resources. I'm obviously from a small local authority, and we currently do not carry out enforcement powers. That's with Police Scotland. Police Scotland's responsibility. It would only really work if all local authorities, particularly small local authorities, assign the necessary resources to carry out enforcement, if it is not going to be Police Scotland.
Okay, thank you. Mr Cameron?
Yes, I think in terms of the confiscation of the badge and the rest, it definitely improves the scheme and it gives authorities the better opportunity to give consistency to the scheme. But like my colleague Colin has just said, I think it's the expectation and it's managing expectation in terms of the public of how you can actually enforce on a day-to-day basis and what will be reasonable in certain areas is the one thing that's got to be looked at. And I think the most important part for me is actually the public awareness that needs to be done around the purpose of the scheme in the first place and public perception of it.
Thank you. Anne McTaggart, please.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, panel. My first question would be, what is the effect of the blue badge misuse in your organisation?
I would, here in Edinburgh, I maintain anything between 52% and 70% of all badges that are on display in the city will be being misused. That's based on exercises that we've done with the police over the years and just my day-to-day role.
Sorry, did you say 72%?
52 to 70%, I would say.
52 to 70%?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Misused?
Misused, yes, misused. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to come back before I take John?
No, sorry.
John, okay.
It's an interesting term to actually say 50 to 70% of blue badges are being misused. What's your definition of misuse?
A genuine badge or a fake forged badge is being used by a third party and not by the badge holder.
Grant. Mr Brady?
Yes, as I said, an urban local authority, Glasgow City Council. Misuse is rife. It's difficult to enforce because obviously you've got to approach the person who's misusing the badge and they can appear at any time. and sort of before I came here, I asked the PAs just to do a wee operation for us in one of our streets because I thought it'd be quite beneficial. And there were 12 blue badges in one particular street between 4 and 6 o'clock. And of the 3 people that appeared, one appeared who was a 30-year-old man whose badge on display said he was a 66-year-old man. One was a 55-year-old woman who a 20-year-old girl then appeared. And there was one who the PAs were able to approach, and it was a genuine badge holder, which was fine. Also, in Glasgow, we have about 20% of all bays occupied by blue badges, which isn't an issue if they're all genuine blue badges, but we have similar evidence. The figures we have are not as high as Edinburgh's, but certainly there's a lot of misuse. And the reason there's a lot of misuse is because it costs you £3 per hour to park in Glasgow city centre, or you would have to park the car park and pay. So really there is an attraction for people to misuse a badge, and the risks of getting caught are slim.
Mr McNicol?
As Stirling Council isn't actually responsible for enforcement, we've got absolutely no evidence of the level of misuse in Stirling Council area.
And Mr Cameron?
I've got limited figures in terms of misuse, but an example, when we first reviewed the blue badge process across South Lanarkshire a number of years ago, we issued in the region of around 800 penalty charge notices for misuse of blue badges, and we ended up rescinding about 50% of those that were issued, and the rest. So there is a percentage of misuse, but it varies for reasons.
So there is a kind of huge scale there affected. Have you identified any trends in who commits the fraudulent misuse of blue badges?
Mr Catchlove?
No.
It can be anybody. It could be anybody in this room, for argument's sake. It could be a teenager, it could be a student, a businessman, lawyer. There is no sort of demographic to who misuses blue badges, really. I think, especially in Edinburgh, it comes down to, again, how much it costs to park. You know, the attraction there to misuse a blue badge is, you know, it's so nice, you know.
Yeah, I would concur with that. Wide demographic. Really, we've had all sorts of people whose mothers have died, people using their badges. We have removed about 18 fraudulent badges, cars off the street, and we report them via the police. So a wide, varied demographic. I couldn't really put my, say one specific age group or anything.
Mr McNicol, I take it you don't really have an answer because of your situation.
Yeah, well, we don't have decriminalised parking enforcement in Stirling, so we wouldn't have that data.
We'll get to the police later on that front. Mr Cameron?
In terms of the experience that we have when we've done work with blue badge holders in the area, abuse ranges across the spectrum, from people who are legitimate blue badge holders who simply don't understand how the scheme should operate because of the information that comes out and, quite frankly, the quality of information that comes out with a badge, right through to, as colleagues have already said, people in all levels of society who misuse and abuse the scheme. And I think that's the public perception, in that it's not a scheme that necessarily is valued by wider society. People don't understand the purpose of it and the fact that without a blue badge, many people wouldn't be able to participate in simple day-to-day activities.
Thank you. That's me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Cameron Buchanan, please.
Could I declare an interest that I have a blue badge? So I just wanted to say, my neighbour had a blue badge that was stolen, and there was no way of identifying where it was, because I just wondered if you think we should be changing the blue badges so you can identify the person, because it's one side you show and not the other side, because it was stolen and she never got it back, so she had to apply for another one. But it's still out and about, if you like.
Mr Catchlove?
I totally agree. At the moment, I would like to see... I have a similar system. We have a database where all lost and stolen badges are reported to me. It goes on the database, and if we're lucky, I've never actually come across a stolen or a lost.
Isn't it? Sorry.
Yes, I think it is. Yes, sorry, it's pure. I think if I was to be doing my job and actually came across a stolen or a lost badge being used, it would be down sheer luck, because we don't have the technology at the moment to actually track these badges, which would be nice, but we don't, and it's down to luck.
Could we not change the design of the blue badge so that there's a reader on it or something, or to show the picture or the name, because it depends which way you put it up, doesn't it, really?
It does. No, the technology, I believe, is there. within the system. It depends on the cost to local authorities. It depends on the technology, especially for those decriminalised parking authorities that have the handheld computers with scanners. It's scanning through the glass, etc. So we know that technology is available. It's how that technology can actually be produced into the badge, and the badge can actually be read through the glass of a windscreen, etc.
Brady.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the things that the old orange badge, I think that's what it was called, you used to have a photograph in the front end to show it, but there was issues about discrimination, or when the new badge was brought in, they changed that. I'm not sure the full detail on that. Right, but the BBIS, the new database that they're setting out nationwide, should allow some sort of conductivity and connectivity with the local authorities over time, and hopefully that will assist. I think one of the issues is that as local authorities we all carry out enforcement in different ways, and we all have different technologies, and it's trying to mesh all that together so as if we see a stolen badge, then we could take some form of action then, and it's what action do you take, because one of the things that I have described is you've got to catch the person, so you've physically got to stand at the vehicle. Which, you know, but we can't. Some councils don't do towaways. We do towaways. So if we find a fraudulent badge, we'll remove the vehicle from the street and we'll report it to the police.
Can I just intervene there? What happens, for example, when somebody, if I'm in the car and I go off and do some shopping, and I leave my wife or somebody else in the car, but I've got a blue badge, and then I see my wife or somebody walking perfectly well towards the shop or something? What happens there? That's happened before. You know, that sort of thing happens before. It's not fraudulent, but I mean, nobody's stopped.
This is one of the issues we all have, is that in the back of the badge it says you're allowed to drop off and pick up blue badge, and I've got no dispute with that. But one of the things we do have is people will say, if we approach them and say, "I've dropped my father off." Now, that's a difficult question then. You've then got to ask somebody, well, where is your father? And you know, that conversation is not one that's attractive or is a good place to be. But people, because of the ambiguity in the back of the badge, I think, people do use that as a reason. And it may be a perfectly valid reason. I'm not disputing that. But it does then question the use of the badge. For example, somebody driving somebody to their office and then driving onto their office and parking up all day, and then driving back to pick somebody up. Is that a valid use of the badge?
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought so.
Is that difficult?
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought so. Carry on.
Mr. McNicol.
My understanding of the new badge was there was data protection reasons or some other reasons why the picture was actually put in the back, so it wasn't actually couldn't be displayed. But my understanding was that the badge then had the technology that it could be read through the glass. So if any enforcement officer could scan the badge and knew then who the person, the holder of that badge was. So that was my understanding of the technology. So there was a national, so all the badges are now in a national database. So everything could be relayed to what was on the national database. I'd take that what needs to happen now, and my colleagues here have been talking about it, is the next stage of getting the technology and the people and the resources to actually carry out the enforcement with the completion of this first stage, as it were, to have a national database. How many people have actually got blue badges? So you have a record of what's out there.
I'm just going to say, on the continent, they have the picture displayed. I mean, in France and in Belgium, for example, because these things have the EEC sign on the right. I know, because I've got one. But the picture is displayed, so you can see the picture of the person who's there. So I don't think it's a problem here.
My understanding is that in terms of the new badge and the rest, there's actually an identifier on the front, which is a coding which actually tells you what the gender and the age of the person who is. So in some senses, the debate and the discussion about whether the picture is needed on the front, the question, I suppose, is the picture needed at all on the badge necessarily with the technology that we've now got?
I wouldn't have thought so.
Well, that's one of the points, and I think it is the point of what do we provide to blue badge holders in terms of being able to read the badges and see images and so forth with key fobs and the rest. Do we give a holder that places the badge firmly on the windscreen so that technology can be used appropriately, as opposed to relying on where might somebody place their badge on their dashboard? You know, we've had tax discs in certain places on car windscreens for however long the system has been in place. Why do we not have the same kind of system for a blue badge that can easily remove it on a day-to-day basis when needed?
Alex Rowley, please.
Yeah, good morning. I mean, I found that quite staggering. 50 to 70% these badges being issued are misused, and so the legislation comes through, and you have this ability with new enforcement officers, but the legislation in itself, what would local authorities actually need to do? So if you have the powers, that's not going to solve this problem, is it? What is it you would actually need to do? Because I do know that the Scottish Government say that there is no cost implications to the Scottish Government. Local authorities, transport services we see potholes here, there and everywhere, and they're under massive pressure. So, how far does this take us?
Well, at the moment we do approach people. We have a misuse form that we use, and we've been using it for many years. And this year, the PAs have reported 118 badges misused. Now, the PAs cannot ask to have that badge and take it off them. I think it's a step forward in that we'll be able to take that badge at that point off the street and then be able to get it back to the original keeper. The local authority will be able to write to the original keeper and inform them that the badge has been misused, and obviously either don't hand it to that person who's misusing it or retain it, and they'll be given, I'm being told what we're going to do is there'll be guidance, and they'll be given that guidance on how they should use the badge in future. I mean, I think obviously being an urban authority, I often see the misuse side of it, but obviously there's huge advantages to those that require blue badges and require access. So it'll give us the power to take that badge off the street at that point. And I think that for us is a step forward. It's not the conclusion, and it's not the end of the journey, but it is certainly a step forward for us, because if we're actually talking to the person at that time, it's very frustrating for the parking attendant, for the person just to tell them to and then drive off.
Mr. Catchlove.
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree with my colleague Michael. It's not one size fits all scenario. It's not ideal, but it goes as another weapon in the armoury for us to deal with the misuse. You may hear later this morning that there are organisations that don't want us to confiscate. They want us to be able to inspect but hand those badges back. My argument is that my experience over the last few years, I tend to know, perhaps a gut feeling, perhaps when speaking to somebody with a blue badge, whether the badge is being misused or not. By being able to confiscate it there and then stops that misuse. It is probably, I would put my hand on my heart and say, if I was to speak to somebody this morning where I suspected that misuse was going ahead, it would not be the first time that person has misused that badge. It's the first time they've actually been caught misusing that badge. So by being able to take it off them, we stop the misuse straight away. We don't give it back to them, allow them to move around the city, use it somewhere else. It takes 5 days perhaps to get a warning letter back to the badge holder, another 5 days that they can carry on misusing that badge before the badge holder may even know about the misuse. So by actually taking it there and then, we stop it dead in its tracks.
That it should be an offence to use a badge that's been cancelled, and should that be liable to summary conviction, do you think?
I think it just clarifies, there would be no argument if somebody was to be reported for using a cancelled badge. There would be no argument, they would know, but we know there are processes within the bill that it wouldn't happen unless a letter of cancellation had gone out to the badge holder, so it wouldn't be a case of straight away. We would be in a position to seize that badge and, if need be, report as a summary proceeding and under criminal legislation.
Mr. McNicol.
The question was around resources within councils, and Gordon talked about the armoury. Stirling Council, along with all the other councils who don't have DPE, would really need to establish the armoury to start off with. This would then be another piece of the legislation that could be added to that. But currently, within all the small councils that don't have DPE, we're still have to rely on the police and the traffic wardens to do enforcement. This legislation, if this is to go ahead, Stirling Council and also other smaller councils would need to make the decision whether they wanted to go under DPE and whether there was a business case to go under DPE. I think then if they made if there was a business case to have decriminalised parking enforcement, this would just be added onto it, so it would be an advantage to have this. It would be another part of the armoury.
Mr. Rowley.
Just coming back and picking up on that point, because that I suppose is the other danger, that as local authorities take over this role, the police don't see it as being a role that they continue with, and if local authorities are cash-strapped and don't resource it properly, the police budgets are being slashed right across Scotland, they're cutting back. What is the relationship right now with the police? I mean, this level of misuse, 70%. I'm also seeing that a telephone survey that was carried out found that about 76% of respondents experienced misuse, but the main problem for them was actually disabled spaces being used by people who didn't display badges or didn't have badges. So that seems to be a major problem for people who actually have the badges and can't find the parking spaces. So we do seem to have a real issue here in terms of enforcement, and the police have responsibility. I mean, this is a criminal act that is being committed.
Well, the opportunity to speak to the police later, but relationship with the police.
Convener, what I'm trying to get to is what is the relationship right now?
That's what I'm just going to ask Mr. Catchlove. Relationship with the police.
Personally, within Edinburgh, very, very good. I've had a fantastic relationship with the police. More than happy to help. Over the years, I've carried out training with the police to bring them up to speed on the legislation, look at how to identify fake badges, what the information means on the badges. So when they're out, they actually know what the badge means and what the information on the badge, they can actually do something about it. So especially over the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 years, the experience of the police has grown when it comes to blue badge fraud and misuse, because they now know the legislation, they know how to deal with the legislation, how to deal with people who are misusing. So from a personal perspective, very, very good.
Mr. Brady.
Yeah, the relationship with the police has been fine, but the reality is it's not something they will enforce on a day-to-day basis right now. We have to approach them if we're doing some joint operations so as that they can seize the badges, because obviously they're the only ones that have got the powers just now to seize the badges. I concur with you that I think, to be honest with you, it's something the police are moving away from anyway. They've already announced that they're moving away from enforcement, and the traffic warden service is all but going to be disbanded. So I think the reality is that I don't see the police seeing that, but they'll be able to speak for themselves as a core function of what they do. So unless we have powers to seize these badges, then I don't think we could rely on the police to do so.
Mr. McNicol.
Generally, our relationship is very good with the police. But just as Michael says, you know, the police have made the decision, given their resources, limited resources, and what they see as their priorities, they're moving away from this enforcement. So I think it's local government has been pushed towards having to deal with enforcement.
Have you got evidence that the police are moving away? Apart from the traffic warden situation, do you have any evidence that the police are moving away from enforcing these kind of issues?
Only from the fact that the traffic wardens are being withdrawn. There used to be 6 traffic wardens within the Stirling area. There's now 3. They were planning to remove them completely this year. But there's been discussions with members of my council and Police Scotland, and there's been an agreement to extend the traffic warden cover in Stirling until the end of April. But what happens after that, I'm not too sure.
In terms of this withdrawal, have you any figures of what traffic wardens were doing in terms of enforcement, the number of tickets issued compared to what's going on at this moment in time? So there's no evidential basis there. Okay, Mr. Cameron.
We've had a very positive relationship with the police in the South Lanarkshire area when we ran our Be Fair or Be Fined campaign about the misuse and abuse of disabled parking bays and blue badges. They carried out a number of purges for us, or with us. Our parking team, though, consists of between 12 to 14 wardens. We cover an area that if you start on the M74, you travel for almost an hour down to the bottom of our area. So we've got 80% of our population live in a 20% urban area of South Lanarkshire, and the rest of it is rural. We've got close to 1,000 on-street disabled persons parking bays in the area, and to be able to enforce those on a day-to-day basis in an effective way or a meaningful way is going to be extremely challenging for us. We're going to have to rely on, if somebody reports us, having people in the local area to maybe go out and try and seize a badge. However, by the time it takes you to get somewhere, will that badge, will that car still be there? That's one of the problems that we have. So.
Yeah, very quickly, Mr.
So in terms of that final point where I'm trying to get to with this, I would hate to build expectations out there that people think this is going to solve all the difficulties that's there. So what you're saying is there will have to be significant resources applied to this by local authorities for it to have the impact that it really needs to have to address the issues that you clearly are flagging up.
Mr Catchlove.
I would say significant resources. I think it allows local authorities to look at how they can enforce the Blue Badge scheme in their areas, whether it be on an ad hoc basis or more committed like Edinburgh are to a full-time investigation team. I think it's difficult, like with Glasgow, another city that we read in one of the submissions that they would like to be able to deploy parking attendant teams in plain clothes, as long as they've got the written authorisation to carry out these type of operations. So it's really using this legislation in the best way possible to allow local authorities to effectively enforce the scheme based on their resources.
Mr Brady.
Yeah, I think it's, the expectation, I don't know how high the expectation is, and that's something we'll have to manage. Because if people, we do get whistleblowers who obviously write in and say a badges have been misused, and it's very, very labour intensive to actually find that person or actually get them to approach their car when the parking attendants are around. We have significant issues with that when we do what we call stings, if you like, during in the morning. We have several PAs out, and what we find is people just don't park up. They go drive off somewhere else and park. So it's an incredibly difficult thing to enforce.
Mr McNicol.
The first thing we would need to do is look at a business case for having decriminalised parking enforcement, which may or may not wash its face. If Stirling Council then did decide to go forward with decriminalised parking enforcement by default, we would be assigning the resources to deal with all parking offences, including blue badge offences.
Mr Cameron.
I think the bill has absolute merit, and I think in terms of what it provides, it does help us improve the scheme in general. But I come back to the point that it's general public awareness raising that needs to be done in terms of having an effect on people's choices they make on a day-to-day basis, and saying actually by doing something as simple as driving into a bay and just getting on your train because you're running late, you're taking away a life opportunity for somebody else. And it's as serious as that, quite frankly, because people do become prisoners in their own homes because of other people's just unwillingness to walk a few fuller yards when they can perfectly make that choice to do so. And so we've got to put an emphasis on that.
And by being lazy, they can get a £1,000 fine. But that in itself doesn't stop the deterioration of some folks' quality of life.
No, it doesn't. And I think that's it. So it's a campaign that actually raises it to the profile that says this scheme is absolutely valid and worthwhile and something that everyone in society should value, because it may happen to you at some stage in your life where you rely upon it.
Thank you. Mr Lawson, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Mr Catchlove, I have to concentrate on the answer that you gave earlier, because I think that will be the headline from this committee today, the 50 to 70% misuse of blue badges. And I just want to try and get into the issue. How many blue badges does Edinburgh City Council issue in a year?
I don't know, sorry, I would have to, but what I can tell you, currently we have 17,000 Edinburgh badges. That excludes commuters coming in from outside Edinburgh, tourists, but as it stands today, 17,000 badges are on issue to Edinburgh residents. And
out of those 17,000, are you, and I understand it's difficult to calculate from the surrounding local authority areas where blue badges are issued, how many people travel into Edinburgh to park up in Edinburgh?
I'm sorry,
it's difficult. No, yeah. I know it's difficult to calculate that, but in relation to the 50 to 70% figure you gave us, is that misuse?
Yeah, misuse. That will be people, third parties, using a badge to park up in the city somewhere within. It doesn't have to be within the controlled parking zone.
Well, what I'm trying to get at, because as I said, the headline is 50 to 70% of blue badges are being misused. Yeah. Is it 50 to 70% of blue badges that are being parked up in Edinburgh City Council?
Those being used, yes, currently used, yes. Sorry,
that's a difference from
on display.
50 to 70% of blue badges being misused. Because, as I said, the headline would be 50 to 70% of blue badges in Edinburgh are being misused. On display today may be being misused. Yes. Right, that's fine. Mr Brady, you gave a figure of the Glasgow did some work last year, I believe it was, and you said there was 118 blue badges that had been found to be being misused in the city centre of Glasgow.
I'll clarify that.
Right,
of the ones that the parking attendants approached, of the people they approached, 118, what they term as misuse, which is they fill in a form so that we record that. But 118. So, for example, as I said, in preparation for this, I asked the PAs to tell us how many in the city centre badges were. In the city centre, there were 669 badges on display in the city centre on the 20th of March out of 3,400 bays. That's about 20% of the bays are occupied by blue badges. I don't have the figure that Gordon has for misuse, so I mean, I'll have to bow to superior knowledge. But we have 669 badges on display at any day in the city centre only of Glasgow.
In relation to enforcement, Mr Brady, you've indicated that your parking attendants carry out enforcement of the Blue Badge scheme in Glasgow. Could I ask the other panel members whether or not parking attendants would be suitable in your area rather than as a form of enforcement rather than the police?
Mr McNicol?
If we went down decriminalised parking enforcement, that's the way we would do it, yes. It would be with our own parking attendants.
Cameron?
Yes, we would look to use the parking attendants and the parking unit in general to enforce the Blue Badge scheme.
South Lanarkshire isn't decriminalised at this moment.
Yes, it's decriminalised. Yes.
It is.
Okay. Convener, that's all the questions I have at the present moment.
Okay, thank you. Stuart McMillan, please.
Morning, gentlemen. Just a couple of questions regarding the issue of the enforcement officers. So following on certainly from my colleague John Wilson's comments there. In terms of the local authorities that you represent, what type of training or additional training would you estimate would actually be required? Certainly for either if the parking officers that you currently have, parking attendants, or for additional members of staff?
Personally, I have an enforcement background. I was in the Royal Military Police for 22 years, so I came from a law enforcement environment to another law enforcement environment. The parking attendants and officers like myself would need to know the legislation extremely well to be able to make that sort of judgment call on whether a badge is being misused or not, and that will come with experience. They would need the necessary diversity training, awareness of disability training, I reckon, as well, and communication training. Especially here in Edinburgh, the reputation of the parking attendants is not that high, so we would need to make sure if they were to be deployed in that role in Edinburgh, they were fully qualified to do that.
We already approach people with blue badges, and we already have got training and scenarios for the parking attendants in place. I've got to say, since 1999, since we've been doing these approaches, I can only remember one formal complaint about a parking attendant and their approach. You find that people who are genuine blue badge holders are happy that people are approaching them, and they're quite happy to give the proper and appropriate information, and there's no issue with that. Obviously, there seems to be some concern within the documentation about the diversity training, but as I say, we've already done this since 1999, and there doesn't seem to be any issues. They would obviously have to beef up the training a bit about the actual confiscation and how that would be approached and the appropriate wording to use when that is done. But as I say, genuine badge holders, certainly in the city, I've got nothing to fear, and any feedback we've had has been positive about those approaches.
We do actually have parking enforcement officers who deal with enforcement of the council's own off-street parking places, and it's generally we would carry out diversity training, customer care training, dealing with difficult people training. That's just standard practice to make sure our parking enforcement officers are equipped to deal with any situation that will arise.
Sir Cameron.
Similar to Mr McNicol there, our training is already in place in terms of diversity training, in terms of customer service training, dealing with challenging situations. So it really would be a focus on what the changes to the law were.
Sir McMillan.
So certainly one of the issues that has been raised in the bill is the issue of the plain-clothed enforcement officers. Do you see any challenges with that being rolled out?
Let's start with Mr Cameron this time.
Challenges, yeah, again, I suppose it comes back down to public perception and the rest, and how we kind of assure people that obviously the officers doing the role are doing it for the right reasons, and that they're legitimately doing a job. And I think it's just about that. It's making sure that the public are aware of what the role of the officers is.
Mr McNicol.
I appreciate that there is possibly going to be concerns of having non-uniformed council officers seen as being doing enforcement, because I was reading through the notes here, because I think most of the local authorities, would have suggested, you know, like, let's have it with uniformed and non-uniformed members of staff to make sure we've got a more flexible enforcement arrangement and it's more effective surveillance and best use of our resources. But I can also understand it from the blue badge holders' point of view, that they may not feel comfortable about it not being somebody in uniform. You know, like most people expect to see traffic wardens or parking enforcement officers in uniform.
Mr Brady.
Yeah, we haven't really thought very deeply about whether we would have any non-uniformed officers dealing with this matter. It's something that perhaps once the bill's in place we'd start thinking about a bit more. Initially we would certainly just be using partner attendants to carry this out. We certainly haven't gone down that road, but I think certainly I understand that within the scope of the council there are other areas where our non-uniformed officers are using to use IDs. I think you're right though, there's a vulnerability there about somebody approaching somebody in a vehicle, and that has to be dealt with sensitively.
Mr Catchlove.
I've been working undercover, for want of a better word, since 2006, and I've never had personally an issue. I introduced myself. On my council ID I have fraud officer, so I produce my ID if I do approach anybody, and whether they've been the badge holder or not, they've complied. I've never had a confrontational situation whilst doing my job, and I think if done correctly, I don't think there should ever be.
Across Scotland, there are local authorities that will have like community wardens in whichever shape or guise. Could you see a role for them to be potentially included, for this role to be added on to their responsibilities, for them to be added to what's already provided within local authorities?
I think so. I think the more the merrier. If we can get more people out there dealing with it, it's a deterrent for a start. If you've got especially in Edinburgh, you've got the environment wardens. They're out every day. If people know they have similar powers, are able to either report back or just speak to these people, again, it's just another weapon there to reinforce the scheme, reinforce the local authority's commitment to enforcing the scheme as well, and it might just lessen the misuse.
You on the panel to that just given by Mr Catchlove there?
That some councils already use if you like, the environmental wards to carry out parking attendant duties as well. So I suspect that they would roll that in as part of this.
Yeah. Mark MacDonald, please.
Thank you, Convener. I come from a local authority area which is decriminalised parking enforcement and has gone further than that and banded parking enforcement in with other forms of enforcement, for example, environmental enforcements. In terms of your own situation, Mr McNicol, you mentioned that you've spoken a lot about if Stirling Council chooses to go down decriminalised parking enforcement. Is that an issue that is likely to appear on the council agenda at some point in the near future? I appreciate it's for elected members to decide, but is that something that there is active discussion about within the council at present?
It's actively being discussed as we speak.
And you've spoken about the production of a business case. I mean, one of the issues the committee is obviously concerned with is around the costs that will be associated with the enforcement process. Obviously, for Stirling Council, there would probably be a start-up cost associated that would not attach itself to other authorities. Where are you in terms of knowing the rough costs that might be associated with Stirling Council pursuing the enforcements within this bill?
There has been some business case work done in the past. I recall there been some work done about 10 years ago, which actually showed it didn't stack up at that time. But it depends the level of enforcement that you actually want, the level of enforcement you want to actually have in place. It's being looked at again to see if there's a better model. So we're in the process of doing that. But the expectation is that it may take up to 2 years to go through the whole process.
You mentioned that you already have some form of parking enforcement that takes place already in terms of the parking bays that the council itself operates. So how much wider would you then have to go under the terms of this legislation, just for the record?
I honestly don't know all the detail of it because I don't deal directly with that side of things, but my understanding is that you need to set up a parking office. This may actually be better directed to some of the other three authorities who already have DPE, because they'll have went through the pain of setting up DPE.
I don't want to go too much into the realms of decriminalise parking for local authorities, because I really want to try and stick to the blue badge legislation itself, and whether they choose to decriminalise or not to is a matter for them. They're still going to have to do this enforcement. Mr MacDonald.
I did just want to clarify where this would take local authorities in terms of the widening legislation, but I'm happy to open it to other members in terms of the costs associated with the legislation in relation to their local authority and whether they've had any look at the figures and crunch the numbers.
Mr Cameron.
I think that's the thing, is that actually it's the figures have to be crunched. We need to kind of gather the data, look at where the hotspots are before we would then decide what the best approach is to targeting the abuse that's taking place and enforcing it appropriately.
Mr Brady.
Yeah, I mean, the cost to us isn't probably going to be any more than we do already, because we do enforcement already. Maybe we target resources, and we do that already. We sometimes target areas where we think there is abuse. There's a lot of data out there that we gather as well, so we gather the information on the age of the person and the sex of the person, which you can gather from the number. And we're gathering that, and as the new blue badges next year will be the final new blue badges, we'll be able to gather quite a lot of that data and allow us to target resources. I think it's just a genuine part of enforcement that we have to do. I've got no issues or concerns about it in terms of just part of the role we do just now, except we'll have that additional power to be able to seize the badge. So we will still be targeting any blue badge abuse that we can.
Catchlove.
I just have to agree with what Michael said there. You know, we've, as a local authority, have been doing this actively since 2006. Local authorities will have to look at their budgets to say what is the best way to enforce it. You know, and I think sometimes I get telephone calls from non-criminalised local authorities saying, "Oh, they can't enforce because they're not decriminalised." Well, the misuse of blue badge is a criminal offence, so the local authority has that power, and I think that's a misconception with some non-DP local authorities.
Mr MacDonald.
Do you think that there are any implications that would spread beyond your department to other areas of the local authority, or?
Sorry, when you say implications,
well, in terms of the implications about the cost, is that likely to go beyond simply your department into other areas of the council at all?
I wouldn't have thought so. Like you say, blue badge enforcement is part of parking operations within the council, so it's within their budget. We don't go to any other budget streams within Edinburgh Council for the role. So.
I'm not sure I could cover with that, because obviously there's the administration side of the blue badge, and those badges in Glasgow certainly that are seized and given back to local authority. There'll be an administration process that'll have to be undertaken to write out to the keeper as the keeper of the badge, and also there's a review panel within the bill has to be set up, so there will be some costs associated with that.
Mr McNicol.
I agree with Michael. I think there will be costs associated with the review panel, administration, etc.
Cameron.
Yeah, the costs will cut across not only our parking unit in one resource, but also into social work resources where you've got review panels, etc., and administration involved.
Okay. Very briefly, Cameron Buchanan.
I just wanted to take the other side of enforcement. What happens when somebody is ill and broken their back or something and then recovers? Do you actually monitor these people after 3 or 4 years and ask them how they're getting on? Because a lot of people, you know, are not permanently disabled.
Very briefly, gentlemen, Mr Catchlove.
I would say yes, because if it's a temporary badge, it only lasts for 12 months minimum, up to 3 years. So we still have that flexibility to go back and say, do you still need the badge?
Mr Brady.
The same answer.
Same answer.
Okay, grand. Finally, I want to turn to the review process, which has just been touched upon. What are your views on the review process for the confiscation of blue badges as envisaged? Briefly, Mr Catchlove.
A robust review process is required to ensure that the badges go to the people who do deserve them. And I think we have to look at perhaps third-party assessors to do those reviews, so it does look independent, or it is independent from the local authority, whether you use a neighbouring authority to do the assessments or the review of the assessment.
Mr Brady?
Yes, I think the local authority is probably the best place to do that.
Okay, Mr McNicol?
I'd agree.
Mr Cameron? Okay, can I thank you very much, gentlemen, for your evidence today. I suspend for just a brief moment for a change of witnesses. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to the morning's second panel. I'd like to welcome Graham Lawson of Mobility Access Committee Scotland, Sally Witcher, Chief Executive Officer of Inclusion Scotland, and Helen Dolphin, Director of Policy and Campaigns of Disabled Motoring UK. Welcome to you. Would you like to make any opening statements at all? Ms Dolphin.
I'm from, obviously, Disabled Motoring UK. We're a representative body of disabled people, mainly blue badge holders. About 99% of our members are blue badge holders. We hear a lot from our members. We communicate to them through a magazine, and our post bag is always full. And I would say 80% of the correspondence that we receive is from members who can no longer park because of abuse of the blue badge scheme. So we are very concerned by how the scheme is being managed insofar as who gets badges, as well as the fact that a lot of local authorities do very little to enforce it, and it's seen by so many people as, you know, a kind of victimless crime, when in fact there are many people now that are suffering a great deal because they cannot park when they go out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone, Mr Lawson? Or
I'll give way to Sally.
Ms Witcher.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Inclusion Scotland is, as you may be aware, a national organisation of, as opposed to for, disabled people and their organisations. We exist to try and ensure that disabled people's views inform policy making and to draw attention to the barriers of many kinds that disabled people confront. We have also got experience, of course, from disabled people of issues around misuse of the blue badge. It is clearly an important issue, and I think we would all share the concern to ensure that disabled people's independent living is not unjustifiably compromised by misuse. However, I think we also need to be absolutely sure that it is not compromised by the way in which attempts are made to address that misuse. And that is something which I will expand upon in my evidence.
Thank Mr Lawson.
Thank you, sir. Convener, just to, if I can ask for clarification to point, my name has an E in the end. It's Grahame. Just for the record, just for the purpose of the record. In previous existence, I was head of roads and transportation in North Lanarkshire Council, so I do have some direct involvement in administering roads and parking matters. And I should also say that my involvement in blue badge issues goes back to 1996, when it was the orange badge, and I was a member of the Disabled Persons Transport Advisory Committee in London. So I've had a long history, I hesitate to use the word pedigree, but a long history in the development and review of the orange badge and now the blue badge system.
Thank you very much. If I could ask, first of all, do you think the policy intention of the bill has been met? Shall we start with Ms Witcher, please?
I think that it has certainly the potential to meet the aim of addressing abuse of the blue badge. However, there are a number of issues about the way in which it is enforced that could make the difference between it being effective and also creating or not a new tranche of issues that have an adverse impact on legitimate, genuine blue badge holders. So the kinds of areas that we would very much, which we welcome, include the fact that it would be more difficult to forge a blue badge. That's clearly important. Powers to cancel and confiscate blue badges could be very helpful, but there's a big proviso here. It's important to distinguish between where there is inadvertent, kind of casual misuse, because people are not aware or have not realised, as opposed to misuse that is blatant and systematic and purposeful. And I think I was a little concerned by the tone of some of the previous session. Disabled people experience a demonisation very commonly at the moment in the media around issues around benefits, fraud and so on. We don't want to kind of set up anything that is going to potentially exacerbate the view that disabled people are scroungers, fraudulent, so on and so forth. So whilst acknowledging that this is an important issue, it does need to be addressed, we have to have regard, I think, for how people view legitimate badge holders and disabled people in general. And I think that is one concern I have. We have particular concerns around the use of non-uniformed officers, and again, you may want to explore that later on. But issues around how disabled people to identify these people. And, is there going to be consistency in the way that they make themselves identifiable? Because disabled drivers have been known to cross local authority boundaries. What about the scope for abuse? I mean, what about training issues? I mean, and how they recognise whether people are legitimate blue badge holders or not. I think there's a whole raft of issues. It's some obviously to be picked up in regulations and guidance, but I think some which it's important to think about right now.
We'll come to a lot of that line of questioning as we move on, without a doubt. But you are happy with the general principle, and you think that the proposed bill as laid out would be an improvement?
I think there are elements of it which most definitely will be an improvement, would be an improvement. There are other aspects, though, that require to be addressed to ensure that there is not an adverse impact on the genuine blue badge holder.
Dolphin?
I'll sort of slightly more general, since I suspect you will come to some of the kind of finer points. Generally, we are in support of it, mainly because we see that there is a lot of abuse. We heard some incredibly high statistics earlier this morning on the amounts of abuse that the badge is suffering from, which is of no surprise to me, considering what we hear from our members. I think that at the moment there's loopholes which need to be tightened up. I think it's a slightly ludicrous situation where you can see a badge and know that it's being used fraudulently, but there's very little that can be done about it. I think that that's just a situation that shouldn't be there. Like Sally, again, I have a few concerns about the non-uniform officers and the way that some of this will be carried out, but I guess we'll go into that a little bit later. But in general, I'm in support of it.
Sir Lawson.
Yes, again, I think Max would generally support the the principle of the bill, as you realise, the whole orange badge scheme, the blue badge scheme has evolved and been enhanced and improved over the years. And I think we've had changes to the eligibility criteria and the way it's dealt with in terms of the application, the administration of the scheme. And this, if you like, is the third aspect of the current review, is strengthening the enforcement aspects. So we've improved the way in which the badge is delivered and made it more consistent there. The administration is more consistent. Now we have to get the enforcement again more consistent. And I agree. I think I'm happy with it in principle. There are issues in terms of the detail.
Thank you. Anne McTaggart, please.
Thanks, Convener. You have clearly identified that, you know, your wealth of experience that you've had with the misuse of the blue badge scheme. Could I ask how you feel and what you feel the solution of reducing or eliminating the fraudulent misuse of the blue badges?
Ms. Witcher?
What the solution is, how to approach eliminating it. I think a lot of what's in place or what is being proposed potentially could be helpful in that direction. It is, though, about making sure that, as I said, there are certain issues that are addressed that could potentially have an adverse impact. So, for example, I think there, we need to be sure that non-uniformed officers are not involved in face-to-face contact with disabled people or challenging, because they need to be identifiable. And if they're not identifiable, then it's open to abuse.
The difference between a non-uniformed officer, council officer in this regard, and a non-uniformed council officer who will be dealing with disabled people throughout the country in other regards. Obviously, identification is paramount here, but as Mr Catchlove said in his evidence earlier, he does this a lot, shows his ID and never has had any difficulty. So what's the difference between wearing a uniform and not wearing a uniform, in your opinion?
I think it's to do with the setting to some extent, because this could be happening out in the street. Anybody potentially walking past could be a non-uniformed officer. So how is the person concerned to be able to identify that individual? How are they, I think we just need to be alert to again, whether there's any potential for abuse here. Could somebody who is not a legitimate enforcer be going around and checking people's blue badges? I mean, I don't wish to be sort of overly paranoid about it, but I do think we need to think through quite how we can ensure that the people who are doing the checking, having that interaction, are identifiable as having that authority to do that job. So I think that's one important issue that needs to be sorted out.
A uniform makes that difference. I mean, if there's a naughty person out there who wants to play games with some of these things, it's as easy to get a uniform that looks like some of the uniforms that are out there than it is to fake an ID badge. So I'm just trying to get what difference there is in this area of council business compared to other areas where folk are not uniformed and have that ID badge, which is normally okay as far as folk are concerned.
Well, I think in any situation, I don't have an answer to the extent that you can unequivocally demonstrate who you are in any situation. As a council officer, but I do think that there's a distinction between it's easier to identify a uniform than it is to identify some sort of bit of paper, some document. And we're talking about people with a variety of different forms of impairment here as well, some of which will make it more difficult for people to recognise or have communication impairments and so on. So we need to be thinking about quite how we're never going to rule out absolutely everything. You never can. But I do think there are things you can do that make it easier or more difficult, and that's the best you're ever going to manage. There are other issues too here, though, about how rapidly people get their badges back.
We'll come on to these issues later, okay. Ms Witcher. I want to do this in tranches if we possibly can, because there are a number of issues to cover. Ms Dolphin, please.
How you think we see the scheme being managed? I think the most important thing is for there actually to be enforcement to be happening and known to be happening. And I think that areas which work, for example, closely with their local media and publish numbers of people that have been caught and prosecuted can be a deterrent. If you know that enforcement is going on, you'll be less likely to park there. I think, you know, for example, in private parking situations where there is, you know, less enforcement, for example, at supermarkets, that's probably where you see the greatest amount of abuse, because people know it doesn't actually matter if I park there because no one's going to do anything about it. And I think if people know in some areas nothing is going to happen, then why are they ever going to stop? They're not. So it's about, you know, enforcement being done, being seen to be done, and being published to be being done.
Okay, Mr. Lawson, please.
Yes, Helen's touched on a point about supermarkets, which I'd like to return to later, if I may. But everybody who gets a blue badge, when blue badge is issued, they're issued with a little booklet that says the rights and responsibilities of the blue badge holder. And you're supposed to use, the badge holder is supposed to read it, and anybody who takes you in the car is also asked to read it. In practice, nobody does. They all think they know it because they had a badge before and they didn't think they know the answers. But in terms of the enforcement issues, yes, I think it's absolutely vital that we deal with enforcement. The bill, I think, the way the bill is worded, I think will help to strengthen that aspect. Is there a specific point you wanted to ask? Sorry.
Just if you had seen any solutions that hadn't been mentioned within the bill that you...
Yeah. Well, the other thing I meant to say, Sir Convener, the issue is we talked about police enforcement in the past and the use of the wardens. And the wardens and the police have a very wide range of duties to carry out. The difference we have with parking attendants employed by the council is they're dedicated to a single purpose. And therefore there is the opportunity, I think, to target these resources much more effectively and give a greater emphasis to enforcement of the blue badge. So it's an opportunity. That's all I can say.
No, that's me. Thank
Okay,
you.
Stuart McMillan, please.
Good morning, panel. Just following on from that last point, I had posed a question regarding the extending the powers of wardens to the previous panel. Just with the idea of if there were more people actually involved with enforcement, it might actually yield better results in terms of catching those who are either misusing the badges or fine badges that have been stolen. But your comments there, Mr. Lawson, seem to disagree with that.
Mr. Lawson.
No, I think the whole point about extending the range, if you're talking about community wardens and things like that, the use of them, it's eyes and ears. And it's, if they are the eyes and ears of the local community, and if they're actually just observing things, they can pass on that information to their colleagues and the parking attendants, the enforcement officers in the local authority. So it actually, whether they're directly involved or indirectly involved, I don't think it really matters. But eyes and ears becomes very important in terms of enforcement issues.
Dolphin?
Yeah, I agree. I think the more people out there looking out for it, the better. I don't see that as a problem. As long as obviously people have had appropriate training and know exactly what they're doing, then I don't think that's an issue at all. The issue is authorities that don't seem to think they have a problem and don't think they need to do anything.
Ms. Switcher?
I'd agree with what my colleagues here have said.
Mr. McMillan?
Certainly, the bill doesn't cover leisure trusts and the arm's length organisations. That also the services that previously were within the powers of local authorities. Do you think that there is scope for these types of organisation and the parking facilities that they actually have under their control to be considered as well?
Mr. Lawson?
I'm not quite sure where you're going here in this question. There are, I think in our comments we've made to committee, we've expressed our concern. The blue badge is purely related to on-street parking. And yet, as Helen, I think, has instance, a lot of the issues that come up relate to off-street parking.
I think we're in a situation where we understand that you would like to see much more enforcement across the board. I think the difficulty that we have, and I don't want to curtail debate on this one, the bill doesn't cover this because those are really reserved issues. And I'd rather stick to the bill, the proposed bill as is, rather than stray into other matters if we possibly can. Mr. McMillan, do you want to come back?
No, I'm okay at the moment now. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, in which case, John Mawson, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Ms Dolphin, you indicated earlier in surveys of your members, you identified there was 80% abuse taking place. And we have some information that was provided to committee from Spice that said that Transport Scotland carried out a survey of blue badge holders and found that there was 76% of abuse taking place. Now, we heard earlier in the earlier panel where one of the witnesses indicated that there was 50 to 70% of abuse of blue badges. I just want to try and get, and it follows on from the convener's point, the distinction between the abuse as identified by blue badge holders. Is that about abuse of blue badges, or is that about the abuse of designated parking bays for disabled drivers or disabled users? Because, as the convener has indicated, there are two different pieces of legislation here, and I think this committee needs to be clear about what the views of the disabled community are in relation to the abuses that are taking place, because I was quite shocked when I heard the 50 to 70% figure being used of abuse of blue badges. But what I want to try and get down to is it abuse of blue badges from your members, or is it about the abuse of the parking bays that are supposed to be set aside for disabled drivers, where blue badges may not be being used?
Can we start with Ms Dolphin this time, please?
The 80% I was referring to is 80% of the correspondence we receive is to do with abuse of the blue badge. So I'll just hone in onto what exactly that means. There's all sorts of different types of blue badge. The one is people that don't use a blue badge at all. So they're just, the chances, I'll get away with it, I'm not stopping long. They don't have a badge at all. They just park there. They may get a ticket, they may not. So that's one type of abuse, and that's the sort that tends to happen mostly in the kind of off-street, private parking, supermarket situations where people know it doesn't really matter if they park in a disabled bay or not. Then you've got the other sorts of abuse, which is to do with the actual bays, which is people parking in the bays using a badge which probably doesn't belong to them. It probably belongs to a family member, or it may be a fake badge that they've doctored, or it may be one that they've obtained from some kind of illegal means. But our members aren't really going to know whether that's abuse happening or not. They're not really going to see that. All they'll see is, possibly someone that they think isn't disabled. But, we always say all the time that none of us can really judge whether someone is disabled or not. You may think that they look fine, but they could have a fluctuating condition such as MS. So we do try to get over the point that no one, unless they're a kind of medical professional, can really make these judgments on people when they're doing their shopping. So they don't really know about that, but they can have their own opinions. Another type of abuse that they can see is people that possibly the badge holder sits there in the car while the non-disabled person goes off and does the shopping, leaving basically Granny in the car, so they can take advantages of the free parking, the on-street parking, but then that person in the car is not benefiting at all. Although we do recognise in a very small numbers of situations it is an advantage for a non-disabled person to leave the disabled person in the car so they can keep an eye on them, for example, when popping into a shop. So the main abuse that our badge holders are seeing and reporting on is only really when people don't show a badge at all, because otherwise they don't know. They don't have the skills that we saw from enforcement officers. They don't really know if a badge is doctored or not. I don't know if you've seen many doctored badges. I mean, some of them are fantastic forgeries, really very difficult to spot with with an open eye. So that's the sort of abuse that they're talking about.
Switcher?
I think I'd probably want to make similar sorts of points to Helen. I mean, I think it's difficult for disabled people to necessarily know whether an individual has an impairment that qualifies them or not, and much the same as for others. I mean, particularly if you're not interacting with that person. But there are, I think, what disabled people can talk about is the implications of where there is misuse and abuse, and where that, in turn, because non-legitimate people are using these badges, that has an impact on them in terms of getting around and compromising their independent living.
Mr Lawson.
Thank you. So, Convener, respect what you said in terms of broadening the debate into supermarkets, but we do have to, the perception of the effectiveness of enforcement, etc., relates to all provision for blue badges, and that is part of the problem we have. But in terms of abuse, we get into semantics. There's abuse and there's misuse. It is how much of the abuse is deliberate misuse of the badge, and how much of it is accidental or misuse of it. And I think a lot of people see the blue badge as some form of compensation. I've got a disabled member of family, therefore the blue badge is to make my life easier in looking after the disabled person. No, it's not. It's to allow the disabled person to go about his or her life, make it easier for them. And Helen, I think, for instance, the disabled person being left in the car while another member of the family or whoever goes off into the shops, whatever. Again, that's not the purpose of the badge. The badge is to allow the disabled person. I had an instance with my mother, who's a blue badge holder. She wanted to go to the bank. The most convenient place to park in the bank was outside the bank. I said, right, there you are, Mum. Off you go. No, will you go and get the money for me? Sorry, Mum, I can't, because I know the rules about the blue badge. It's to allow you. If you want me to go to get money, I'll have to go around the corner, try and find a parking place, and then I can go get money for you. And that's what happened. But these are the sort of things that we have. It's trying to distinguish between the deliberate abuse and the accidental abuse of the scheme. But at the end of the day, it is abuse.
Sir Wilson.
One of the things that's coming to mind is the education of the use of the blue badge, and I think Mr Lawson quite rightly identified the blue badge is issued to a disabled person, but can be used by other drivers to assist that disabled person to carry out their day-to-day duties. One of the concerns I do have that's coming forward, and I'd like the panel's views on this, is what we heard earlier from the local authorities, is where the inference that was made where there's a car parked up from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock on a daily basis in the city centre, and there's a blue badge being displayed, that person may be genuinely carrying out their normal day-to-day activities and holding down a full-time job while being disabled. And it's how we get the message over, not only to the people who have used the blue badge scheme, but to the general public, that I think has been pointed out by Sally Witcher, that some people may not, to the human eye, seem to have a disability, but may have a disability that requires the use of a blue badge to allow them to carry out those duties. So how do you think we get that educational message out to the wider society, and in particular those individuals who have used the blue badge scheme?
Ms Witcher?
Well, again, I'm not sure there's any sort of simple answer, but it is a part of a bigger problem, which is around how people understand disability and their attitudes towards disabled people. I mean, it is entirely plausible that a legitimate blue badge holder should be parking as you've described. They may be in full-time work. Because of some of the kind of media coverage you get, because of people's low expectations of disabled people, there's already potentially a kind of default position that disabled people are not going to be legitimately using a badge in that way. So there is a huge job of work to be done to challenge attitudes towards disabled people in general. In terms of this, though, I think this could provide potentially a very useful peg for doing some sort of concerted work around that kind of awareness raising. So I think it's about, and the message is, do not prejudge. Yes, we will come down hard where there is evidence of misuse and abuse, particularly where that is done deliberately, but do not make assumptions about who is disabled and who is not on the basis of what might appear to be the case. I mean, I think this is not a straightforward issue. That's why training is so important when it comes to the officers who will be involved in this process, because it isn't straightforward, and getting it wrong could have a major impact on disabled people who are entirely genuine.
Ms Dolphin?
I think, again, it is complicated, but I think one of the reasons that we have so many kind of people thinking that they have to police the scheme themselves is because they don't see proper enforcement happening. So because they know that nobody else in their local authority is policing the scheme, they take it upon themselves to be, blue badge enforcers and, is that person disabled or aren't they? Or, I think they're abusing the scheme. And I think that people feel they have to do it because they don't think anybody else is. So I think I go back to what I said earlier. If the scheme is seen to be being enforced, then we'll have less people thinking that they have to be, their own personal blue badge enforcer. And we already saw last year, we had, a death in a car park where someone was accusing someone else of misusing a parking space and punched them and they died. And I don't think that any of us want to see any kind of repeats of that. And again, I still feel it's because no one thinks that anyone else is doing it, and so they take it on themselves. I also think, coming back to the responsibility of badge holders, that you say, you get a blue badge book, but nobody reads it. Maybe something we actually have to sign something to say, which isn't a book, but is much clearer, agreeing to abide by these rules, because then when it comes to it, if someone says, oh, I didn't know, well, you signed it. Did you sign something that you didn't read? I think you have to take a responsibility as a badge holder, and I think that we can't, keep saying, oh, the poor disabled person didn't read it. Then, they have to, or the person, if they're not able to, then someone else is doing that on their behalf. There's got to be some responsibility there as well.
Lawson.
Yes, thank you. I think, as Helen says, the badge holders themselves have to take some responsibility, and I think the information we give out to badge holders and their families has to be better and enhanced, and perhaps done more regularly. And I think there's also scope for publicity campaigns through national media and things like that. I mean, if this bill becomes an act, then certainly there's an opportunity. You then make a very definite statement. Life has changed. Enforcement has gone up a gear as far as the blue badge is concerned. And if you are misusing the blue badge, then you're much more likely to be caught. It's a bit like we have signs all over the place warning us about speed cameras, we need to raise that awareness that people know that now there are speed cameras around the country. In the same way, the message has to go out to tell people, look, there are enforcement officers out in the country roundabout now. They're out to get you if you're misusing the blue badge. If you're not misusing the blue badge, you have nothing to fear. In fact, what the Act will do would be to enhance the facilities for you, opportunities for you as a disabled person. But if you're abusing it, then you should fear.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Cameron Buchanan, please.
I was just going to talk about, I've seen some of the submissions, they say, what is the penalty for non-enforcement? Some of them have said it should be a fine and some penalty points on the licence. I just wonder what the panel thought about that. If somebody is misusing the badge, should it be a fine, or do you think penalty points should be on the licence?
The penalty points, again, is a reserved matter, unfortunately. But if you could give very brief answers on that, I'm willing to take it, because we've only got a certain amount of these powers, as most folks know. Mr Lawson, at the moment, yeah.
There are certain practicalities about it. I mean, the blue badge holder isn't necessarily the person who's the driver, and there could be several drivers involved. And I think the practicality of giving points for against a badge, as you say, it's something that would have to be dealt with in another format. I think if there was, I don't know how many £1,000 fines have ever been levied. But I think if we actually raised the incidents in which the fines were levied and or penalty charges were incurred, etc., then I think it would make a big difference.
Often.
In principle, I would like to see points on people's driving licences. I think, if it's the driver of the vehicle that is caught, then, they're the one that's taking responsibility for the fact that that badge was being displayed in the vehicle which they were driving. So I don't think that it is perhaps as difficult as perhaps you imagine. So I think it is a possibility. I think we also have to remember that it's a £1,000 fine for each incidence of blue badge abuse. So there's nothing stopping the fine at £1,000. It could go up. If you've got an enforcement officer that's seen that car parking for 5 days in a row, why can't it be £5,000?
Switcher.
Yes, and I think a fixed penalty notice for illegal parking is certainly one way to go. And I think the only additional observation I would make is that for disabled people, often poverty is a very, very real issue, and again, it's about just being clear about what's going to be the most appropriate way of addressing this, which is going to not going to inadvertently penalise disabled people in a way that's unjustifiable. But yes, other than that, fines may indeed be appropriate, as indeed may be points on people's licences. I think either are possible.
Mr Rowley, please.
Yeah, good morning. Just a brief question in terms of the current situation and what your members' views have been and experience have been in terms of traffic wardens and the police. We're going to hear from the police just shortly, but what has your experience been where abuse has been reported, or what your members perceive to be the role of the police currently?
At the moment, they tend to perceive that nobody does anything. They have, very few local authorities have blue badge fraud hotlines for them to phone up. They phone us up and say, I know this person is abusing a badge, what can I do? And in most instances, we can't do anything. So their general opinion is that nobody really cares and nobody really does anything. They, the kind of general message that we are getting is that they would like to see enforcement, and people, the genuine badge holders have nothing to fear. They are quite happy to show their badge, and a lot of people are quite proud of it, the fact that they're a genuine holder, and they're quite happy to show it. So I think the general opinion that we get is that more enforcement is warranted, and they would like to see it.
I don't think I have anything further to add there. So.
Ms Witcher, do you have anything to add?
I would agree absolutely that it's the absence of apparent enforcement that is the overriding issue. And I just wonder, as a small aside, whether having uniformed officers as opposed to ununiformed officers might be one way in which you convey that enforcement is happening.
Mr Rowley? Okay, Mark MacDonald, please.
Thank you, Convener. Just regarding the review process, in terms of where confiscation or cancellation has taken place, I note in Ms Dolphin, in your response, you highlight the potential unintended consequence of a confiscation or cancellation, and that it can then deprive a disabled person of their mobility, particularly if it's that the badge has been used, for example, by their carer or relative without the disabled person's knowledge. So I just wondered if you wanted to touch on the issues that you have around the review process and what you would like to see in that respect.
I think, coming back to us saying that the disabled person has to take some responsibility for their badge, I think that should be something that goes with it. But we are in situations where we've had people ringing us up and say, my son will not do my shopping unless I let him use my blue badge. So you've got a situation sometimes where you've got family members that are forcing the disabled person to let them use their badge. And I think that there needs to be a separate way to deal with those kind of people, because it's not that lady's fault in a way. She signed the thing saying I won't lend it to other people, yet she thinks, if I don't, what happens to my daily food, weekly food shop? I don't get any food. So there needs to be some way of dealing with that without that lady really suffering any kind of detriment, yet her son, is really the abuser in more ways than one. I would like to see if badges are confiscated and then found, to be returned very quickly to their genuine holder. But I don't think that can continue happening again and again. There's got to be a point when it's decided we can't keep returning it back to you for someone else to be caught using it again. And I wouldn't be particularly generous either on how many times you allow that to happen. I think there needs to be proper warnings, but I don't want to see people who are really put in these very difficult situations suffering because of it.
Sir Lawson?
Yes, I think I got a lot of sympathy with what Helen was saying just now. I mean, many blue badge holders are very vulnerable people, and it's very easy to put them under pressure. And so the incidence of that, I think, is difficult to quantify. So I don't know how much of a serious issue it is. We certainly know there are instances, and Helen would give you details of them. But the issue, as Helen says, is to make sure the badge is returned to the badge holder, and that the badge holder, again, is reminded of their responsibilities under the blue badge scheme. I think if there's an issue of abuse by the family, then I think we're into educating the family as well. And it may well be that it requires a much wider thing in terms of social work, social services being involved in dealing with that. I don't know. But
action legislation as well, if it's something like that.
Yes. That's what I hadn't said, and that's what I had in mind there. So.
Yeah. Ms Witcher.
Yes, and I think the point is that misuse and abuse can happen for such a variety of reasons. It can take so many different forms, and therefore it's important that the redress that you have respects and is appropriate and fitting to the nature of that misuse and abuse. Clearly, what we're concerned about is that a disabled person ends up in a situation where they do not have access to their blue badge for reasons that are not of their making, that they have had no part in creating. But as a consequence of that, they're unable to go out to work, see friends, live their lives. So that is clearly a really important issue. I think, if I may, I think what's happening here is that once again we're touching on a much bigger issue here. And this is around the importance of services like independent advocacy. My colleague talked about social work and adult. You talked about adult protection. The other important way of looking at this is the role of centres for inclusive living, local organisations that work to support disabled people, and the sort of services that they provide to deal with the kinds of situations that might arise, such as has been described, where family members are kind of holding somebody almost, to a situation where they have no choice but to allow that abuse to happen. So, but that's a bigger issue, and I think it's, again, disabled people's organisations.
With the scope of this proposed bill, Ms Witcher, I know exactly where you're coming from. I don't want to deviate too much from the proposed bill. I understand the role for advocacy and other things, though, as well. Can I take Ms McTaggart in for a wee supplementary?
Just a wee supplementary, thanks. I don't want to go off the scope even further, but however, some of that misuse, would it be, I do find within my bag of constituents' complaints, the lengthy time that it takes for a renewal, and what would you then advise the disabled person to do within that lengthy time?
Again, we're going out of scope. I will take very, very brief answers on this. I really want to stick to the proposed bill rather than the generalities itself, and I think it's important we do that. I will allow you briefly to come in on that. Ms Witcher?
I think that's an issue around ensuring that systems are fit for purpose. They're not left in a situation where they're waiting for that badge to show up. That's the challenge.
Dolphin?
Reminders from local authorities, something that was stopped in many local authorities. It's very difficult after 3 years to remember that your badge has expired.
I think it's very much along the same lines in terms of better information and better follow-up by the thing. The Blue Badge scheme itself has been substantially enhanced. I think overall, in Scotland, people get their badges much more quickly than they ever did in the past. Some councils used to be very quick, some used to be very slow. Now it's much more consistent, and it's consistently quick.
To be consistently quick, obviously there needs to be the resources to enable that to happen.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask you one final question then, and that's round about the review process for the confiscation of the blue badges themselves. You've already touched upon this to a degree, and basically you've given examples of where common sense should come into play, and you cannot, unfortunately, legislate for common sense. I wish you could. But your views on the review process after confiscation, as is envisaged in the proposed bill, what do you think of that? Mr Lawson first.
I think the bill raises expectations in terms of the way things are going to be enforced. In terms of confiscation of badges, I think we have concerns. There is potential for abuse by people pretending to be enforcement officers. It's very difficult. I mean, in the case of my mother, when she was a driver, if she was sitting in a car and somebody came up to her and said, "Can I see your badge?" she'd just give it to them. She wouldn't worry about whether the person had a piece of ID flashed in front of her or not. She'd just hand it over. And I think that is one of the difficulties we have, that many blue badge holders are relatively vulnerable people.
Dolphin?
I agree. I don't have such a problem as Sally does with the ununiformed enforcement officers. I've been out with some fraud teams and seen the kind of work that they do, and I think it's actually quite important that you do have the non-uniform as well, because otherwise it's very easy to see that they're there. And I do think that if someone they need to be wearing some kind of information which can be easily verified by a telephone call or something like that. I don't open my door to people unless I can verify them. I would do the same for someone that wants to take my badge away. I think that it's important if that's going to be happening that disabled people are made aware of what they can actually do. And I don't think that a uniform makes the blindest bit of difference, because I go to many shows and you can buy them there at 20 quid. So I don't think that makes a huge amount of difference. I do think that they should be confiscated, because I think we need to get these badges, especially the fake ones, off the market and away from ever being used again.
Sure.
Well, obviously, I agree that fake badges should not be, allowed to continue. The question was about the nature of review, if I'm correct, and I think what we'd want to see is an independent review, where possible. It's important to have consistency in the way this is dealt with, across Scotland, and I think consistency is an important principle throughout. We've accepted it in terms of the design of the badge, but it's also in terms of how it's enforced, and the nature of the review process that's in place. And I think there needs to be consistency across the piece.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your evidence today. I'll suspend for 10 minutes to allow for a comfort break and a change of witnesses. Thank you. We now move on to the morning's third panel. I'd like to welcome Assistant Chief Constable Wayne Mawson, Local Policing West, Police Scotland, Craig Naylor, Superintendent to lead on reform and local engagement, Police Scotland, and David Cabrelli, member of the Society's Equalities Law Committee of the Law Society of Scotland. Welcome, gentlemen. Would you like to make any opening statements?
I would, Convener.
Mr.
First of all,
Mawson.
just to thank you for the opportunity to provide evidence to the committee today. It's very welcome. Police Scotland is committed to keeping people safe. That is our very core business. In terms of parking enforcement, we are changing the way that we conduct enforcement, and that's through removal of the traffic warden role. However, we are committed to tackling dangerous or obstructive parking or the misuse of blue badges, including parking in disabled bays. This commitment remains after the traffic warden service ceases, and we are determined to work with councils to tackle all forms of abuse in this regard. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Cabrelli, do you want to?
Yes, I'd like to make a brief statement on behalf of the Law Society of Scotland. What I would say is that the Equalities Law Subcommittee of the Law Society of Scotland welcomes the proposals to strengthen enforcement powers in relation to the Blue Badge scheme in the bill. We are very supportive of the policy intent behind the bill, which is to identify and minimise the misuse of this and abuse of this valuable scheme, and to reduce exploitation of this by those engaged in fraudulent activities. We do have, however, some reservations in relation to 3 clauses of the bill. Thank you.
Do you want to talk about those reservations now, Mr. Cabrelli?
I suspect we will touch on them in the line of questioning, I suspect. But if you would like me to go ahead, I'm happy to do so.
I think that would be useful, considering that the committee only this morning received word from yourselves about your concerns. I think it would be very useful for us to hear you spell them out first.
I'd be happy to do so. The first issue arises in relation to Clause 4, or Section 4, the offence of using a cancelled badge. The Law Society notes that it introduces a new strict liability criminal offence, which, in our view, is disproportionate. To use a cliché, we would characterise it as sledgehammer and nuts. We would recommend that the most appropriate method of addressing the policy intent behind the bill would be through civil penalties in the usual manner, so fines rather than a criminal offence. We suspect that would strike a fairer balance between addressing wrongful use of blue badges and creating a fair and just process in relation to the blue badge scheme. There are a number of reasons for that. The first reason is that the misuse or abuse of a blue badge would already be covered under the common law offence of fraud. And secondly, in relation to the proposed strict liability criminal offence, we're concerned that the requisite intention to defraud would be lacking. So someone could be prosecuted and convicted under Section 4 without having any intention to defraud, so there's no motive or intention. So first of all, I think we'd say the first concern is in relation to unnecessary duplication, and then secondly, it's the absence of any mens rea for the commission of an offence. I think we need to be careful when we're criminalising individuals and just really stop to think before we do so, particularly where there is existing common law, which is extremely flexible to address this particular situation. So that's the first issue. That's in relation to Clause 4.
Before we move off of that particular one, because
Sure.
I think we've had evidence today, particularly from Edinburgh City Council, where you've heard that figure quoted of 52% to 70% misuse. We've heard from the disability organisations today, which quite clearly, I think, shows that any existing legislation that is there is not helping those folks who are failing with this. You talk about the strict liability offence. situation. But surely that would happen because prosecution would be in the public interest.
Yes. The figures that have been quoted, 50 to 70% in respect of misuse, what I don't know is the existing, well, the facts behind those particular cases, because it could be, I've no idea, but it could be that some of those cases related to individuals who've reported badges lost, and they've actually then found them, and then they actually, because the badge has been cancelled, they are actually in abuse, you know, they're breaching the law. It could also be that a carer or a relative doesn't know that the badge has been cancelled or confiscated and uses the badge in those circumstances. So although there may be misuse, we don't know the exact circumstances behind each of these cases. And
Should we take these things into account before they decided that something would go to court or not? This would be the norm with any other offence.
Well, it would be irrelevant what the circumstances were, because under Section 5, it would be a strict liability criminal offence. So the commission of the Act is sufficient in itself to prosecute.
I wonder if I could have comment from the police on that particular issue that the Law Society has raised today for the first time.
I've got a slightly different view on that, Convener. Quite often, local authorities will cancel a badge for quite serious reason, whether that be theft, some kind of fraud, etc. And when you're looking at that, really taking that kind of thing to the civil court, it is quite a step. How do perpetrators of this type of crime view prosecution through the civil court? Probably not as serious as the criminal court. So my view would be somewhat different. I would say that actually what we are proposing in the legislation is the right thing.
Thank you. Your second point, Mr Cabrelli.
Could I maybe come back on that point? Is that possible?
Yeah, briefly, yeah.
I think what the Law Society of Scotland is not saying is that abuse or misuse of a blue badge should not be prosecuted. The point that we are making is that there is existing criminal law in place to address that. So if someone uses or misuses a badge, all that we are saying is that there would be two avenues. One would be the criminal route under the common law offence of fraud, and then the second route would be the civil penalties situation.
How many prosecutions have there been under the existing fraud legislation?
For misuse of the blue badge scheme? I don't have those figures. I can't answer the question.
Mr Superintendent Naylor, sorry.
Convener, thank you very much. My understanding from Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, over the last 3 years there have been no more than 30 cases submitted for prosecution in regard to this per year.
Your second point, Mr Cabrelli.
The second point relates to Clause 4. That is the use of plain clothes enforcement officers. The Law Society is concerned in relation to the absence of uniformed officers to police the blue badge scheme. Our preference would be for the enforcement officers to have some kind of outward display through uniform of the ability to enforce the blue badge scheme, bearing in mind that a lot of the individuals concerned will be vulnerable, and the sensitivities here are such that the existence of the authority that's conveyed through a uniform would be our preference. It avoids confrontation, needless confrontation, and also if an enforcement officer presents a badge or identification, the individual concerned has no way of knowing whether it's genuine or not, or checking that.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here because there's a huge amount of enforcement that's carried out by council officers who are ununiformed at this moment in time. What makes this area so different, in your opinion, from other areas such as environmental wardens and others who carry out their business on a day-to-day basis across the country without a uniform?
It's the context. The context is extremely different. We're dealing with individuals.
But what's the difference in terms of context of a non-uniformed officer approaching someone in the street, for example, who has committed a litter offence or has allowed their dog to foul? What's the difference?
Well, the average holder of a blue badge scheme may be vulnerable. They may be vulnerable, and we need to take that into account. They may be confused. It's a difficult situation. There's potential confrontation, needless confrontation here, which needs to be considered. That is not necessarily the case where an environmental warden looks.
A person may be vulnerable and may be confused. A person out who is littered may be vulnerable and may be confused. You know, I think what we're doing here is we're putting people in boxes, which is something that I don't particularly like, I have to say.
Categorise it in that way. I would say that the reason we need to address why is it that someone has been given a blue badge is because they're disabled. They're disabled, and as such, they may have mobility problems, they may have dexterity problems, they may have mental health problems. The context is extremely different, and the ability to identify with an outward display of authority is absolutely crucial to avoid upsetting individuals in that context.
Okay. Your third point, Mr. Cabrelli?
The third point relates to section or clause 6. The Law Society Committee is concerned about the absence of a procedure to appeal an internal decision of the local authority to a sheriff. The machinery in the section envisages that any decision taken by a local authority to cancel or to refuse or not to renew, etc., a badge would simply be dealt with in-house in the local authority. We're slightly concerned that that would be a breach of Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights. The existence of the judicial review process, in our opinion, is insufficient of itself to ensure compliance with Article 6, bearing in mind the access to justice issues which arise where an individual seeking to overturn a decision of a local authority before the Court of Session, because the only the only procedure to take a judicial review would be through the Court of Session.
Do you accept that the House of Lords have stated judicial review was sufficient for the purposes of Article 6, where the issues to be considered by a review body require a measure of professional knowledge or experience and the exercise of administrative discretion?
I would always defer to the judgment of the House of Lords. Who am I to question it? What our concern is really about the costs involved in taking a judicial review to the Court of Session. We're talking about £40,000 to £50,000 on average. And if you're someone who has applied for a blue badge, it's been refused or it's been cancelled or not renewed, is it likely that you're going to have £40,000 to £50,000 lying around in your bedroom to instruct counsel and go to the Court of Session? I suspect not. Why not have a more simpler procedure put in place to enable a decision to be appealed to a sheriff in the sheriff court, which would cost substantially less in terms of resources?
Obviously, it's a question for the committee and for the Parliament to decide whether judicial review is disproportionate to remedy a situation. Can I get you to clarify your point? This breach that you say is there, House of Lords says that there would be no breach in that regard. What you're really arguing is whether or not the costs are disproportionate or not, rather than whether or not it would be wrong to proceed in this manner.
Judicial review is compatible with Article 6 in the sense that it gives an avenue to go down to seek to review a decision of a public body. However, behind that is the actual cost of doing so, the access to justice issues which that entails. Is it reasonable, and also is it proportionate to expect someone to spend that amount of money to try and overturn a decision that's been taken by a public body? I think the position of the Law Society is that it's not. And there's a much simpler route, and that is really to enable a review to be taken by the sheriff.
Case law to support that, Mr Cabrelli?
Case law?
Yeah.
No, we have evidence of our members in terms of the amount of money that it generally takes to take a case to the judicial review. It's not something that you would find in case law, because it's really an access to justice issue rather than a point of law as such.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to turn to ACC Mawson now. We've heard from some of the witnesses earlier that they feel that there may be a difficulty in terms of the withdrawal of traffic warden services, and that maybe the police don't take these kind of offences seriously enough. From my own experience, having recently visited Elgin with John Finney in the police subcommittee, I was told that in Murray, since the withdrawal of the traffic warden service, there has been the same, and if my memory serves me right, actually more folk dealt with for their offences, their traffic offences, since the withdrawal of the service than the wardens were doing themselves. Can I ask you what the situation is across the country, and can I ask you how seriously you take these matters?
Thank you, Convener. We take it extremely seriously. That's the first thing to state publicly. For me, anything that significantly and disproportionately impacts on people with less mobility or some kind of physical impairment has to be tackled, and Police Scotland are absolutely committed to that. In terms of where we are at the moment across Scotland, roughly half of the councils so far have gone down the line of decriminalised parking enforcement, with more potentially moving down that line as well. What we're actually finding is that, as you've said, there's been no significant impact since the traffic warden service was largely removed on the 3rd of February. We have got 11,000 frontline operational divisional policing officers within local policing. We've made it absolutely clear to every one of our 14 divisional commanders that we have to be robust around this, and where there are people parking with no blue badge at all in on-street parking bays, they have to be dealt with. Where it's off-street parking, again, we need to link in with our partners, our statutory partners, community groups, and listen to them. And where there is a problem, deal with it in partnership, and we are doing that. We've already had so far this month days of action and weeks of action, and we've been issuing those tickets where they are needed. So we're changing the way that we enforce. We have not walked away from the enforcement, quite the reverse in fact. We're absolutely committed to it.
Before I bring in Ms McTaggart, I just have one final question for you at the moment. And Mr Cabrelli said that parts of the proposed legislation is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Do you think it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut?
I don't actually, Convener. I think it's long overdue. I think the bits the sections rather that really apply to Police Scotland, particularly Section 3 around the power to confiscate badge, which is welcome, and Section 4, which is the offence of using a cancelled badge, and we've already discussed that. If I might just touch on one area that is still a remaining concern, it's quite difficult for patrolling officers practically when they come across a blue badge to actually know, unless it's really obvious, whether it's a forged badge, it's a cancelled badge, it's a withdrawn badge or whatever. The specialist knowledge is within the local authorities. So if it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, we can start the process of trying to find the right person in the right council area to hopefully get on the end of a phone. What we'd really like to see is some kind of joined-up mechanism which makes easier, particularly out of hours, for patrolling police officers to get instant access to those 32 different IT systems, those 32 different databases where all this information is contained. That's what we'd like to see. That would be a really big step forward.
Okay, obviously we can't legislate for that, but I'm sure that plea has been heard. Ms McTaggart.
Yeah, and I think that kind of answers one of my questions as well about some of the solutions and trying to reduce or eliminate the fraudulent misuse of the blue badges. But if you've got any more solutions that you can think of just now, they would be more than welcome. But also, if I ask Mr Cabrelli as well, please.
Mr Cabrelli. I don't think I have anything to add on that particular point.
Mawson, do you have anything else you wish to say on that point?
Well, we try to gather as much information as we can. Every local area commander at Chief Inspector level has weekly tasking meetings or bi-weekly tasking meetings with all of their statutory partners, which will invariably include people from the council. So we're trying to get information informally and update our own intelligence databases where we can. But you're right, it does need to be more joined up.
Mr Rowley, please.
Morning.
Good morning.
I mean, the evidence we've heard this morning would suggest that there is widespread abuse of the current blue badge system that's out there, and perhaps not Police Scotland, but your predecessors and the authorities right across Scotland. You would have to ask yourself, you know, has this been taken as seriously as it really should have been? Even where you talked there about the prosecutions and the fact that there is no more than 30 prosecutions under the current existing law, that's not necessarily taking as read that therefore the law was wrong. You know, if it's not been policed, and that seems to be what's been suggested this morning in the different evidence that's there. The groups representing people with disabilities have said that their members just don't see anything happening. So how would you respond to that? Because it's certainly not been a picture painted this morning that this is something that actually has been taken serious by too many people. And the final part of that question would be the information in terms of the actual bays themselves, and the survey done by Transport Scotland, which suggested that 75% of respondents said that the biggest problem was the abuse of the actual parking bays.
There's a number of facets to your question there. First of all, Police Scotland are responsible for on-street parking in the council areas that remain where DPE hasn't been adopted. And I think that's an important point to make. Where we are responsible and we're dealing with on-street parking, we are very proactive in actual fact around issuing tickets to people that are parking in bays where they shouldn't be doing that. The point I've made just earlier there around it would be really, really good if we had access to the information that is held on the 32 different council systems around which badges have been withdrawn, for what reason, which have been cancelled, which might be subject to fraud, etc. That's the information that would be good for the future to increase the number of proper misuses of blue badges. Because unless it's really obvious to the patrolling officer, it can go unnoticed. But you're absolutely right, sir, that we do need to increase those kind of prosecutions working in partnership together. You're absolutely right.
Following up for that, I mean, and I was encouraged by what you were saying about the divisional commanders being told that this is a serious issue, and what you did say about the joined-up mechanisms. And I do just wonder through perhaps community planning partnerships or as these powers, because I think everybody's welcomed this morning the proposed legislation, and I think we can take as read that people are saying that, well, generally, that it's the right way to go and the right way forward. But how do we ensure that it's not seen as the police almost passing it across to the local authorities, and how do we get that better joined up so that if we've got these new powers, we get them to work better to achieve what it is that the objective of the bill is?
Can I maybe add to Mr Rowley's point here, which I think is quite important? Is there a role here for the local commanders and the local policing scrutiny committees to get together and coordinate that spread of information where it is possible to make your job easier and to make the local authorities' jobs easier? Mr. Superintendent Naylor.
Thank you. I suppose the key aspect for me on enforcement is that proportionality that we've talked about earlier on, and ensuring that we're targeting the right places at the right time with the right resources. Part of the problem we have is the lack of knowledge of where there are abuses. It has been mentioned in some of the paperwork that Spice pulled together and today already about people saying it's hard to get in touch with a police officer to deal with abuses. It's never been easier to get in touch with a police officer through 101 and the various other methods that we have in place in Police Scotland. Now, the evidence of the abuse doesn't go away when the vehicle moves. The evidence is there in terms of the vehicle being parked, what badges on the vehicle, and if a traffic warden, police officer or parking attendant sees that, they can take the notes, which provide very strong evidence at the time. We don't seem to be getting that joined-up approach. And it's one of the things that I think is absolutely appropriate, that we do feedback in through our Chief Inspector's tasking processes, that we encourage our partners to share that information with us if it's something they come across, and not be frustrated at the side of the road when someone drives off in their car.
I've got the great privilege of sitting in this seat at this moment in time, and I can see the public gallery as some of this is going on. And I can see some of the witnesses that have appeared previously and their various nods of heads and shakes of heads and their general body language. In terms of that sharing of information, and you've pointed out how the public can share that information with you. How much communication are you actually having with local authorities at this moment in time on these issues? Are there regular liaison meetings round about some of these issues and other community safety aspect issues? How can that be improved? Because, as I've said a number of times today, the proposed legislation is fine, but we cannot legislate for common sense or communication.
Thank you. I've not had the privilege of seeing what's behind me, so I'll try and not be too controversial. On the day before we went live with the removal of the traffic warden role on the 2nd of February, 3 journalists phoned into our on-call media office complaining of parking issues in various different areas around the country. I'm very glad that we had a very sharp and astute media officer who actually said, "Why are you phoning the media office? Why not phone 101 and we will send a police officer to deal with it?" We need to go back to that common sense approach where people can report abuses and tell us about these issues. Now, whether it's a Police Scotland matter or whether it's a parking attendant matter, we can then farm the issues out. In relation to your point about ongoing discussions, local discussions through community planning partnerships are ongoing in terms of what Police Scotland policing plans will be next year, and I know a lot of these are being presented to local scrutiny boards as we speak. In terms of national work, I'm involved with a group which has representation from COSLA, Solace, the Scottish Chief Officer of Transport, Scottish Government, Transport Scotland, to look at not only blue badge issues, and I know there is a working group on blue badges, but also around the totality of parking enforcement across Scotland and how councils can move towards decriminalised parking enforcement, how we can look at alternative methods of maybe consortia of decriminalised parking enforcement, and how we can reassure our communities that where Police Scotland still have that legislative responsibility, that the 11,000 officers that we have out there are well tasked, are well briefed, and have the knowledge and understanding of the legislation to do an effective enforcement job. But part of that has got to be down to our communities and our representatives in communities telling us where the problems are.
Come back. John Mawson, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Just to follow on from Alec Rowley's questioning about the answer that was given by Superintendent Naylor earlier about the 30 cases. Can I just clarify, was that 30 cases that were prosecuted, or was that 30 cases that were reported?
The information that I received from the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service as part of our Equality Impact Assessment was that over the last 3 years, on average, 30 cases per year were reported. I don't know what were prosecuted, I'm afraid.
That's why I asked that question, because it's fine to say there's been 30 cases reported. It's the level of prosecution. Given the earlier evidence that we heard today, where one witness indicated that 50 to 70% of the blue badges in the City of Edinburgh today, parked up in the City of Edinburgh, are actually parked either fraudulently, illegally, or abusing or misusing the blue badge system. I find it very surprising, and the Glasgow evidence said there was about 108, in one trawl there was 118 misuse of blue badges being reported. surprising that we have such a low reporting of incidents of this nature, given the seriousness of some of the issues that we're trying to cover in the legislation, and given the seriousness of the abuses that are taking place, when we include in amongst that fraudulent use of the blue badge. Why do you think we have such a low reporting level, and do you think those reporting levels would increase if we bring in this Members' Bill that's before us today?
Superintendent Naylor first, please.
I think the reporting levels would increase, and I suppose one of my concerns is what is the implication and knock-on for other organisations like the Fiscal Service for an increase in reporting? Is there a financial impact there? However, both councils that you've made mention of are decriminalised parking enforcement operators and have the responsibility for the enforcement of parking offences on street. Where we have issues is that around seizing badges where parking attendants are seeing abuses on the street. They don't have that power at present, and this legislation brings it in, which is a very strong move in the future.
Mawson, do you want to add to that?
No, I think Superintendent Naylor's covered that perfectly well. I think it will lead to a rise in cases reported, but actually that's what we want to see.
Really?
On the question as to whether reporting will increase as a result of the legislation, as a direct result of the legislation, I don't think there's any way that I have any way of knowing whether that would be the case or not. What the Law Society is concerned about is situations where individuals will be prosecuted and convicted where they have no intention to defraud.
Lawson?
Given the number of cases, 30 cases over the last each year over the last 3 years that have been reported, we don't have levels of prosecution at the present moment, and then maybe that is one of the problems that we do have, is trying to get that message out, is the lack of evidence in terms of prosecutions to show a determined case for the public to be made aware that where they are abusing, and if it is, and I take on Mr Cabrelli's point, whether or not there is a deemed to be fraudulent use of blue badges. But clearly, if someone's sitting who has a fake blue badge in their car, then that is fraudulent use of the blue badge system, so therefore it should be prosecuted. That aside, just to go back to ACC Mawson's comment earlier about the coordination of who is issued a blue badge, because one of the problems that you identified is at the present moment we have 32 local authorities who each are responsible for issuing the blue badges. How easy do you think it would be to get a central database of where blue badges have been issued and who has been issued with a blue badge? Because if you're saying one of the problems may be that we can't determine, basically from 5 o'clock on a Friday evening to 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, whether or not abuses of the blue badge system is taking place. So what would be your solution and in relation to trying to resolve that problem, bearing in mind we have 32 issuing authorities in Scotland at the present moment?
That's a really good question, and there's no easy answer. It's going to be complex. It will take time. There will be a cost implication, but that's exactly the kind of thing that through Superintendent Naylor's group we can...
Can I ask a question here? And, sometimes I'm a little bit simplistic about these things. There are 32 local authorities with 32 programmes, which are probably quite basic things, I would imagine. Hauling that information together, to my mind, and I am simplistic when it comes to IT, it would not be that difficult, and it's maybe something that you could add into I6 when it's up and running, is it not?
Well, I'm not cited specifically on the technical abilities of I6, convener, but certainly what we will do is look at that, and the forum that Superintendent Naylor goes to, with all the right people around the table, is clearly the right forum to take that forward. But you're right, we need to do something.
From my perspective, all you need is 32 Excel spreadsheets from 32 local authorities, which need to be changed on a regular basis, which could be done by email. Maybe I am far too simplistic in these things. Often the difficulty is round about the data protection issues, but I think sometimes we make mountains out of molehills out of these issues. And I have to say that I get a little bit fed up a bit. Sorry to interrupt your line of questioning, Mr. Lawson.
It's okay, Convener. The issue that I was going to move on to is that while we have 32 issuing authorities, we have a standardised blue badge that is now being used by those 32 local authorities. And it was the question about how easy it would be to actually be able to transfer the data from, bearing in mind data protection legislation, the data that could be transferred to Police Scotland to allow them to have that centralised database tied into the local authorities, so that it could be done as we do, say, such as the electoral roll, where it's updated on a monthly basis or a daily basis, depending on the valuation board. So would it be possible to coordinate that type of arrangement with local authorities so that the Police Scotland do have a central database?
Superintendent Naylor.
I think the way you've described the electoral register is a very good way of looking at it. It's something we would like access to, but we don't want to own the data. It's not our data. So the issues around data protection would not become ours, but we would get sight of it. So I'm very keen that we would be able to have something like that. But again, I would be, I think, reluctant to say I6 would be the solution for this. I6 is focused in a very particular way. That would be lovely, Convener. Thank you very much.
No further questions.
Thank you very much. Stuart McMillan, please.
Thank you, Convener. I'll have to have a chat later on regarding what I6 is, as someone who wasn't in a local authority beforehand.
Nothing to do with local authorities. It's a new super duper, so we're told, going to be police ICT system. We await it with anticipation. Mr. McMillan, sorry.
Good morning, panel. Also, by the previous panels, I'd asked questions regarding the issue of non-uniformed enforcement officers. And so, what are your opinions regarding non-uniformed officers participating in this particular function?
My view on that is, again, similar to the convener, quite simplistic. I think the preventative value and the reassurance value of mainly having enforcement officers in uniform is obvious. That is where you're going to get the most value out of them. However, I think it's equally important to have the option in the legislation of having plainclothes enforcement officers, because sometimes we come across sustained, really problematic abusers of disabled parking bays, blue badges, etc. And it would be useful to have that tactical option of having an enforcement officer deployed in plain clothes to gather the evidence. So we would welcome the option, but see it as probably the exception rather than the norm.
Mr. McMillan.
Sorry, could I maybe just add a touch of very tactical information on this? The Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act in Scotland would be the part of the Act that would cover these officers. There are very significant powers that have to be put in place and authorities given by senior officers within each body, so the council or the police or whoever who would authorise that activity. So the safeguards around it are very, very appropriate. I think the points that were made earlier on in terms of identification of plainclothes officers is absolutely right, and I would be slightly concerned if we were to go down a significant amount of enforcement by plainclothes officers. Plainclothes officers are excellent for gathering evidence and intelligence.
Mr. McMillan.
Thank you. Certainly from the previous panel in particular, we did hear of issues that were raised and issues of concern regarding many people who may have a blue badge that may well be vulnerable. And also we heard some concerns surrounding that. So what safeguards, or what certainly what safeguards, well, do you think that the existing legislation is strong enough, or do you think there would need to be either some amendments or some discussions with the organisations that represent people who are disabled and who actually have blue badges, to ensure that the non-uniformed enforcement officers are only going to be used in the exception as compared to the norm?
Mr Mawson.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's two key issues to this. There's a communication strategy that's got to be developed that includes all partners. It includes people with disabilities themselves as well. And we have to get that right. And I think there's probably a need for a little bit of extra training for people that will be specifically deployed in the plainclothed role, so that they have good quality identification, they know how to interact with people, because this is a different way of doing enforcement, and we need to make sure that they approach this in the right way.
Mr Brelly?
I think the Law Society would support that. It would be useful if there was some mechanism whereby a member of the public could check whether the identification of the plainclothes enforcement officer to verify their identity if they're not going to be wearing a uniform, so that there are appropriate safeguards in place. That would hopefully reduce tension, confrontation between the member of the public and the enforcement officer.
Superintendent Naylor, please.
Thank you. We have gone down the road of standardised badges across Scotland for the Blue Badge scheme. It would be sensible to go down standardised badges for plainclothes enforcers for the whole of Scotland. To have the same parity with the users and the enforcers.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, Mr McMillan.
On that last point, if that were to be the case, likes of, I posed the questions earlier regarding the community wardens, potentially for them to have maybe extended powers to undertake this type of role. But they are, at the moment they already have various powers now, and they will have identification. With your suggestion there, Superintendent Naylor, would that mean that, that the identification they would have, well, would they have to carry maybe two different types of badge, or would it be or a kind of a hybrid badge, or what?
I would love to give you an answer. I don't know, but what would be good is if someone working in Duns or someone working in Dundee has got the same style, nature of badge, and there is one way of contacting the issuing authority to confirm
it's not beyond the wit of man to print a double-sided badge with one side the local authorities details and the other some universal one. Again, I'm being simplistic. I'm sure that happens already elsewhere.
You carry two badges.
Or you carry two badges. Mr Buchanan.
Yes, somebody touched earlier on about putting the blue badge somewhere on the windscreen, so it'd actually be attached to the windscreen, which I think is a rather good. I am a blue badge holder, I should declare my interest. I wondered if this, what you think of this idea, so that if it's transferred from one car to the other, but the badge would be attached to the windscreen, because very often you can't see the badge, and then you'd be able to see both sides of the badge because it's on the windscreen. It could be read through with one of these readers. What do you think of that?
Superintendent Naylor, knowing that you're probably about to say that the badge goes with the person and not the car.
Yeah, indeed it does, but I think there is a benefit to have some form of easy way to read the badge. We've had tax discs in this country for many, many years, and police officers are well used to walking past the car, glancing at the badge, seeing if it's still in date, and if it's not, going back and doing some further work. If there was a nice, easy facility to slide a badge into a holder, then I think that would be very beneficial.
That's the point I was making. I mean, I'm well aware that it belongs to the holder, not the car. But often, if people have two cars, or they're driving in their wife or mother's car or something like that, you could slot the badge in. That's the real point I was making.
Mr Mawson?
I agree with Superintendent Naylor. It does seem like a common sense proposal.
Mr Cabrelli, do you have anything to add there?
I'm supportive.
Okay, thank you. Mr Buchanan, do you want to come back?
Fine, thank you.
Okay. Can I thank you very much for your evidence today, gentlemen, and I suspend for a brief period to allow the witnesses to leave. Thank you. Item 2 today is consideration of subordinate legislation. 3 negative instruments we have before us today. The Town and Country Planning Tree Preservation Order in Trees and Conservation Areas Scotland Amendment Regulations 2014 SSI 2014/53. The High Hedges Scotland Act 2013 Supplementary Provision Order 2014 SSI 2014/55. The Non-Domestic Rating Valuation of Utilities Scotland Amendment Order 2014 SSI 2014/64. Members of a paper from the Clerk setting out the purpose of the instruments. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered these instruments and did not have any comments to make on them. Do members have any comments to make on these instruments?
I was just going to ask, I think it's Mark, about these high hedges.
I'm quite sure that Mark will not be able to answer your question, Mr. Buchanan.
Sorry.
Do you have any comments to make? You can ask him later, outside.
Thank you. Right. That was me told.
Are we agreed not to make any recommendations to the Parliament on these instruments? Agreed. Thank you very much. As agreed, we now move into private session and I suspend.